Welcome to the Mason Dukacek Show. And before we jump in, this episode is brought to you by WorkforceAlchemy.com, helping leaders uncover hidden profit leaks inside their workforce. Dr. Victoria Mensch is the founder and CEO of the Silicon Valley Executive Academy, where she helps executives lead through the rapid transformation driven by AI and emerging technology. With a PhD in psychology, an MBA from University of California, Berkeley, and more than 25 years of experience in Silicon Valley. She brings a rare breed of human behavior insight and innovation strategy. She's known for her vital, VITAL, leadership framework, helping others and helping leaders move from burnout and reactive decision-making to clarity, resilience, and transformative growth. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mason. I'm so happy to be here.
So you've spent more than 2 decades inside the innovation culture of Silicon Valley. What leadership habits, in your opinion, separate the executives who, let's say, adapt quickly to disruption from those who continue to struggle?
You mentioned adapt. So adaptability is a very useful trait on its own. When you think about innovation, you obviously think about something new. And I think what sets Silicon Valley apart and Silicon Valley companies apart is their ability to compete on innovation, to sustainably introduce new products over and over and over again. So there's something that's really embedded in that Silicon Valley innovation culture. But the culture is made by people. So one habit or trait, I would say, that separates those who excel in this environment and those who struggle in this environment is curiosity, ability to stay curious, an ability to learn, and the willingness to learn. Yes, maybe I don't know all the answers right now. I don't have all the data right now, but I'm willing to learn and I'm willing to pivot.
So many leaders feel pressure to move fast with AI, even if they are unsure about the strategy. What is, in your opinion, the biggest mistake that executives make when trying to implement AI in their organizations?
There is a lot of FOMO going on. So you're absolutely right, Mason. People are looking at all the hype around AI, all the news that is being blasted from each and every corner. And there is a lot of that fear that, oh, I missed out on something. So you're right. There is a lot of pressure to do something with AI, anything with AI. The danger here is really to treat AI as a tool. Yes, it is a tool, but more than that, it's really the transformative force. So what do you want to get out of this? Looking at the outcomes rather than at the process, that would actually going to help with the AI effort. It's with any technology. It's just AI is so powerful that really multiplies the noise and mistakes and amplifies those. So if you have a broken workflow, applying AI to the broken workflow just makes more workflow that's broken. AI is really the opportunity to step back and look at these things the way you do them now and actually ask a question. So if I started to do something today, how would it look differently? Instead of just looking at the processes that you currently have and just applying AI to automate those processes.
See, it's interesting to me to have this conversation with you about the culture of the community where you work, because there are, by contrast, there are obviously other parts of the country where it's not the fear of missing out; it's complete resistance to change. And like, what does this mean to me? And they're afraid of innovation and they're afraid of acceleration and drag their feet intentionally to protect the sense of security they have with the world they know and understand. And I get it, but I think that one of the reasons I was really looking forward to this conversation is because the mindset of the people in your area is very much fear of missing out and innovation and how do we accelerate and amplify. And it's a nice contrast. And I mean, I talk to folks from all different perspectives, but I'm very, very fascinated and excited to learn more from you today. So you often talk about the intersection of human psychology and innovation. What psychological blind spots, in your opinion, hold leaders back when their industries start changing quickly? or rapidly? What?
Well, one of the things I think you touched upon, right? So there's a little bit, not a little bit, there's quite a bit of identity crisis, if you wish. So I have that identity, and it's on the personal level and it's on the company level. If you're leading a company, your company is doing something well, right? So there's a core business there that you want to protect. You've done something to take your company to this level. So you want to protect that. Now, when we start talking about innovation, one of the fear that we're talking about is really, well, how do I change without breaking what's working for me, right? So, and that's that identity crisis. This is what's working for me, so I want to control everything around this. So that control, that identity, and holding on to that identity, that what can derail your innovation effort. The other one is, maybe if you're a leader in the sector, there's an overconfidence, right? So I know how things are done, and that kind of inability to be open to uncertainty and taking on new information that does not necessarily fit into your current frameworks.
Interesting. So you created the Vital and VITAL
Mhm.
leadership method. What problem were you seeing repeatedly among executives that led you to develop this framework? And can you tell us a little bit about it?
This framework really helps with on the individual level, right? So one of the things that I noticed that, I have this background in psychology, but I spent all my time really in Silicon Valley in high tech companies. And the reason for that was that I went through a couple of cycles of burnout before I knew what burnout was. So I became a psychologist because I thought that was my passion. And then I started working as a psychologist, only to realize that I don't like it. I made a mistake. I invested all this time to become a psychologist, but I made a mistake. And then I pivoted into corporate world, only to go through that cycle over and over again before I realized that there is a constant in this, and that constant is me. So no matter how much I want to change the external environment, maybe it's a job, maybe it's a career, maybe it's a place to live, maybe it's a company. No matter what, I take myself with me. So this vital method is really about that. How do I take control of how I react, and how I interact with the situation around me? So this is all about reclaiming your energy and really developing those burnout proof strategies, protecting the asset that you have, the most important asset that you have, and that's you, and that's for vital, right? So vital energy management, that's the V, heard of it. So how do I protect my energy so that I can perform under all that stress and under all that pressure? And we came up with this a fantastic exercise that I call it the joy list, or a micro joy list. When the idea there is really to intentionally bring that joy back into your life, so that what will allow you to re-energize over and over again. So you have that motivation, you have that willingness to continue with your effort. The I stands for inner mastery, and that's how you lead others the way you lead yourself. So, are you holding on to the things that you can't control? So, are you controlling too much around you? So you're not delegating. So, true is the true success redefined. So. When you stop measuring your input in terms of hours, there's a limited number of hours in a day, right? And you start actually measuring in of value, and in outcomes. So that makes a dramatic shift in the way you lead and the way you become a role model for people around you. And then, obviously, based on all that, how you take aligned action and how you take people with you. So you lead by design. You really become that role model that allows others to follow you much easily and with more motivation and with more loyalty.
Is it and L? I guess L is the loyalty part, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure I'm keeping up there. I really like what you said about managing to the outcomes because I had a conversation probably around December with a former Hollywood executive named Stephen Puri, and he was talking about how their industry wasn't affected by COVID that much as far as working together because they had always worked remote.
Mhm.
And he said it kind of freaked people out who weren't in his industry because they're like, well, how do you know people are working? How can you make sure that they're putting in the hours? And he said, we aren't worried about how many minutes there are on a time clock. And if they're in constant motion the whole time, we're looking to see if the outcomes that we're after are happening. on time. And that was old hat to them in their industry, but folks outside of that, not so much. So, I mean, there's a lot of folks that still manage to constant state of motion between the time you clock in and the time you clock out. I'm not saying there's not a space for that in some areas, but in a land like what you're talking about, where innovation and speed and acceleration are all important, worrying about where someone is on a time clock's not that big of a deal. Of all of that stuff you shared with me, that jumped out.
Absolutely. And that's a big shift. And some companies are doing this better than other companies. Well, especially when you're a leader, you're on top, right? So I was on both sides of the table. I was an employee and I was an employer as well. As an employer, yes, there's definitely fear of, what is it that people are doing when you don't see them? And that's the practice, from a personal, again, from the individual leadership qualities, that's a practice as well to have that level of trust. What it also means is that there is a responsibility on the leader to organize their work based on the outcome and measure those outcomes. So you need to help people in your organization and your processes to really set up those expectations for outcomes and let go of the way people get there. So that the delegation piece, right? So how do you relinquish unnecessary control and still get the results? So now when we're talking about AI, for example, in some companies that have that culture of measuring value in hours, this actually can backfire on people. So you start automating a lot of tasks, and then there's still expectations that people now will perform at the speed and at the quantity of the outcomes the same way as machines would. And you completely dismiss the human element in this, right? So if you can automate all those processes, why would you want people to keep up with this pace, right? So now you actually want to put a little more thought and create an environment where people can create value for you, not necessarily in the amount of hours, but the value that's unique to them. So there is definitely some of that going on in companies, and not just non-Silicon Valley companies and Silicon Valley companies as well. I think collectively we're trying to figure out what's the best way to implement AI and make sure that it actually helps us to improve our processes, improve our life, and not just completely exhaust the people and burn them out.
So you've worked with senior leaders across large organizations and scaling companies. What is one leadership decision that you have seen create a dramatic turnaround in culture or performance?
I think the decision on the leadership side that makes a big difference is a commitment to clarity.
Clarity. Okay.
To clarity, yes. Um, Especially when we're talking about major transformation effort, it's very important to have as much transparency as you can, to give as much transparency as you can to people within the organization. Set that clear goals, set the expectations, and provide updates over and over and over again and over communicate. So that clarity and that transparency what will help people to understand where the company is moving toward and also will help them to contribute in a meaningful way. So a lot of companies, they make a decision in the top of the organization and then they almost forget to make sure that others understand. They would just, push out the workflows and orders for people to implement, and that does not help, especially everything that's related to technology adoption. So the clarity and the transparency. And within that clarity and transparency, it's okay to change the goals as long as you're transparent about that. And it's also okay to not have all the answers and say, well, these are the decisions that we made based on these assumptions. And that's how we're moving now. And if the assumptions change, then we'll change our direction and you will know.
Fair enough. Many executives, because you were talking about clarity. So, and I know many executives today feel overwhelmed by the pace of change. How can leaders maintain that clarity and still make high quality decisions when everything around them is just accelerate?
Yes. That's true. There is a lot of information, a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of complexity. We have to accept it. We have to accept it that the complexity is increasing. And our human brains are not built to deal with that complexity on so many levels, right? So, understanding that and accepting that you don't need to have all the information all the time to make a decision, to accept that there is uncertainty. And the only thing that's certain is that there is uncertainty, that there is a disruption. That disruption can come at any time, in any way. And you have a set of tools to react to those unexpected changes. Now, how do you develop that set of tools? You develop that set of tools with a strategic thinking, right? So you prepare for that uncertainty. So you run those scenarios. You get into a room and you look at the future. You look at the what's going to happen in a year, what's going to happen in 3 years, what's going to happen in 5 years and 10 years. You run those scenarios and you run those tactics and response frameworks. In the end of the day, what's going to make a difference is that clarity around the reason why you're doing this, right? So that's what's going to be the North Star. So this is the North Star that we're holding dear, whether it's the mission of the company, whether it's a personal mission, your purpose. How do you serve? So your why, right? So this is why I'm doing this. This is why my business is doing this. This is why my company is doing this. And you hold on to that, and that will help to understand what's important and what can be let go.
I had a gentleman on recently. His name was John Malura, and he was a engineer, and he'd worked with NASA, and we were kind of talking about the same topic. And I think what he shared was the other side of the coin of what you did, where you talked about accepting that there's some uncertainty and still moving forward. He just said gave me a quote that I thought was brilliant. He said, "One test is better than 1,000 opinions. Try it out, see what happens." And it just thought that was a nice bookend to what you're saying. I know you've also said in the past that automation can sometimes increase burnout rather than reduce it. What are organizations getting wrong about the relationship between AI, productivity, and human motivation?
Well, first I want to comment on that quote that your guest gave it before. That's absolutely true. So one of the kind of pages from Silicon Valley Innovation book that we like to talk about is that bias toward action, right? So which means running experiments. You run experiments, you collect data, and then you pivot based on that. And at the same time, that uncertainty is still there. So there's a limited number of data you can collect anyway, and there are some scenarios that you won't be able to run. But I think it's a beautiful quote. So thank you for sharing that. Now, in terms of productivity and AI and efficiency, I think when we look at AI and the possibilities of AI and opportunities that AI can bring, it's easy to start applying this to basically do things faster and hopefully cheaper. Though I know a lot of companies are running into realization that it may not be cheaper, but it will definitely be faster and more efficient in terms of automation. So now the question is whether this is actually what we want, if this is the best way to use this technology, because the best way the AI has that transformational power, the best way would be to make things better. So there is an opportunity, and that's the mindset shift that we're talking about in terms of leadership. There is an opportunity to not only improve your P&L right now in this quarter, I don't know, the customer service department, or decrease the number of drivers in the cars, but there is an opportunity to actually elevate the work that we do, really transform those business processes, and bring up that creativity and that judgment that's uniquely human, and bring that online, and to get better results, not necessarily faster results and more efficient results, but better results, the way that may not have been possible before.
Okay. So you mentioned a little bit earlier, you were talking about the importance of curiosity. How can leaders cultivate curiosity inside of their organizations that maybe have become a little bit risk averse?
Yeah, so curiosity really cannot live in places where you cannot know something, or you cannot make a mistake. So when we again talk about Silicon Valley and those lessons from Silicon Valley companies, there's this understanding that failure is inevitable when you're doing something new. So that culture of embracing failure, that's kind of the other side of that curiosity, that you're not punished for a failed effort. Now, when we talk about failure, nobody sets up to do something new to fail. This is not a desired outcome, but how can you make the best out of those failed efforts? Again, not acceptance. So we talked about experiment a little bit. So that's how you treat it. You treat it as a lesson. And the failure only becomes a failure when you don't learn out of it, when you all is left is regret. So within the organizational structure, the allowance, the acceptance of a certain failure rate, you did your best, you collected all the data, your assumptions, you did the best with your assumptions, you did the best effort, but then it did not work out. So why did it not work out? What did we learn from it? How can we pivot? What can we do to move forward? Yes, there's a kind of the individual character traits to keep trying new things, but there is an organizational structure that needs to be there to support this.
Okay. So, looking back at your career, what experience most shaped how you think about leadership and innovation today?
For me, working in it and in the technology companies and seeing the implementation of technology and impact of the technology on other businesses and people's lives, at the end of the day, for me, the biggest aha moment and the biggest insight was how important people are and personalities are. And no matter how powerful the technology is, at the end of the day, it comes down to how people are going to use it, how people are going to adapt it, how people are going to adopt it, and how people are going to accept it. And that's the psychology part in me that's very interested in that. How you bring people with you, how you create that joint goal to move forward. How do you create that clarity and understanding that people would actually want to adopt your technology? So no matter how big the technology is, no matter how transformative or how advanced and how fantastic it is, at the end of the day, it can easily fail because people were not on board with that.
So, if a CEO asked you for one practical action that they could take this quarter to future proof their leadership team, what would you tell them to do?
So I would tell them to put their executive team together and run through future scenarios. So not only what have you done today, what's your goal this quarter, but what else did we not account for? What are the assumptions that we did not think about? How can we do this differently? So if we were to start this company today, how would it look like?
So, if there was just one piece of advice that you could give to people who are watching or listening today, what would be the most important advice that you could offer them and why?
So what I would say is that leadership is not a place on the org chart. Leadership starts with self-leadership. So wherever you are in the org chart, whether you're on top of the org chart, whether you're at the bottom of the org chart, leadership starts with self-leadership. Wherever you are, you can make an impact. You can make a decision. You make your own choices. So there's a lot of power in that. We're all empowered to make that difference and lead on any role in any place within the organization.
It's I paid my way through college with Army ROTC, and I remember my instructor telling me something I've never forgotten, and I've heard others say it since, but it's very relevant to what you're discussing. He said, "You can't expect anything from anyone else that you're not willing to do yourself." So when you're talking about leadership starts with yourself, very applicable. If people want to know more about you and the work that you do and how you help companies, what are the best ways for them to learn more and to be able to connect with you?
If you like the themes that we talked about today, if you like these conversations and you want to continue this conversation and learn more, the best way is really to sign up for our newsletter at svexecutive.academy. The newsletter is called Innovation Insights. We push it every week. So that would be the best way to learn more about this.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining. I hope everyone else learned as much and had as much fun as I did. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mason.